Welcome to my philosophy channel. Why do most people know exactly what to do, yet constantly fail to act? We often find ourselves standing at the edge of a massive chasm, looking across the void toward the life we deeply desire. We possess the strategic vision, the intellectual capacity, and the rational understanding of every single step required to cross that divide, yet our feet remain frozen. Why does this profound paralysis occur? Many individuals mistakenly believe that their inability to achieve greatness stems from a fundamental lack of competence. However, the underlying truth is vastly different. The root of this pervasive inaction is not a deficit in ability, but rather a deeply entrenched emotional crisis. You are infinitely more capable than you currently realize, but your tremendous potential is constantly being crushed by the overwhelming weight of your own unmanaged emotions. Chapter 1. The enemy within the mind. Throughout history, great thinkers have recognized that the most formidable battles are rarely fought on physical battlefields. As the ancient wisdom suggests, defeating the bandits in the mountains is remarkably easy, but defeating the thief hiding within your own mind is extraordinarily difficult. What exactly is this thief that resides in the shadows of your consciousness? It is the paralyzing anticipation of disaster that grips you before you even take your first step. It is the intense fear of public humiliation, the unrelenting obsession with absolute perfection, and the terrifying dread of uncertainty. These internal phantoms construct an invisible prison that traps your phenomenal potential. Concrete problems in the external world are seldom impossible to resolve. If you cannot write a proposal, if a client ignores your inquiries, or if you latch onto a flawed strategy, these are merely technical issues that can be overcome through relentless practice and focused dedication. The true obstacle that prevents a person from achieving meaningful success is always concealed deeply within the subconscious realm. Before you begin any meaningful endeavor, your imagination conjures vivid images of catastrophic failure. You become entirely consumed by how others might judge your perceived inadequacies. The ultimate distinction between a true master and an ordinary individual lies in how they choose to distribute their mental attention. Masters seldom allow themselves to be trapped by their emotional responses. When confronted with a harsh reality, they instantly analyze the objective facts. They ask themselves where the problem originates, what specific resources are missing, and what immediate action must be taken. Conversely, individuals with fragile mental fortitude expend massive amounts of energy attempting to soothe their own frustration, despair, and crippling self-doubt. By the time they have managed to calm their inner storm, their desire to actually solve the objective problem has completely vanished. The mind is a battlefield where the individual must constantly confront their own illusions. Emotion often masquerades as rationality, convincing you that hesitation is simply prudence. But we must radically question whether failure itself is truly as horrifying as we imagine. Unless you are engaging in reckless behaviors that invite financial ruin or legal destruction, the vast majority of everyday failures are perfectly manageable. Will a rejected proposal destroy your existence? No. Will a failed interview erase your inherent value? No. The difficulty in accomplishing a task is never rooted in the objective complexity of the task itself, but rather in the magnified fear that your mind attaches to it. A challenge might only possess a difficulty level of 3, but your internal anxiety will artificially inflate it to a formidable level of 10. This exaggerated dread effectively kidnaps your willpower, leaving you entirely incapable of meaningful action. The core lesson here is that the enemy is never external. It is always the reflection of your own untamed insecurities. Chapter 2. The Dialectics of Defeat. To overcome this deep paralysis, we must fundamentally reconstruct our philosophical understanding of failure. As a great historical figure once articulated, we must never fear making mistakes because mistakes possess a profoundly dual nature. On one side, a mistake inevitably causes a tangible loss of time, energy, or resources. However, on the other side, it serves as the most exceptional teacher one could ever encounter. If failure carried no inherent benefit, it could never be considered the mother of success. We must embrace the dialectical truth that, when errors accumulate to an extreme point, a reversal inevitably occurs. When mistakes pile up into a mountain, the light of breakthrough will finally arrive. Unfortunately, the majority of people only ever perceive the negative dimension of a mistake. They only see the financial deficit, the embarrassing social awkwardness, and the painful blow to their fragile ego. Consequently, they run away from failure, living their entire lives in a state of cowardly avoidance. But if we elevate our perspective to a higher philosophical vantage point, we recognize that while a mistake destroys obsolete structures, it simultaneously manufactures something immensely valuable: practical experience. Failure is never a terminal destination. It is always a brand new point of departure. Every single time you stumble, objective reality is delivering a customized lesson destined to improve your future strategy. If you refuse to attend this grueling school of hard knocks, you will never graduate into greatness. Consider a simple, universal example: practicing your basketball shot. You throw the ball, and it clangs loudly against the iron rim, missing the hoop entirely. Do you suffer a complete nervous breakdown in that moment? Does the sky suddenly collapse upon you? Absolutely not. Instead, your nervous system instantly generates objective feedback. You realize the force was slightly too weak, or the angle was marginally skewed to the left. You immediately retrieve the ball, adjust the trajectory of your wrist, and try again. In that specific context, what exactly is the failed shot? It is the singular foundation upon which your future improvement rests. It is the physical world objectively informing you how to recalibrate your aim. Without the unvarnished truth provided by those missed attempts, your overall accuracy could never possibly evolve. Yet, when we apply this identical logic to our professional or personal lives, a bizarre transformation occurs. When a project fails, people suddenly conclude that they are fundamentally worthless. When they face rejection, they believe it is a permanent indictment of their character. The difference lies entirely in how we subjectively frame the concept of defeat. On the court, a miss is just a miss. In life, we maliciously interpret failure as a total annihilation of our personal identity. But the profound truth is that they are ontologically identical. Your terrifying life challenges are merely endless repetitions of taking a shot at the basket. Every unsuccessful attempt simply conveys a cold, objective fact. Your previous actions did not perfectly align with the fundamental laws of reality. Success is nothing more than the beautiful moment when your subjective thoughts finally harmonize with the objective mechanics of the universe. Chapter 3: The Cycle of Practice. The journey from weakness to absolute strength demands a rigorous methodology. This pathway is not a straight, uninterrupted line toward glory, but rather a relentless spiral that ascends through continuous repetition. A person only becomes formidable by initially engaging in direct practice to gather raw, sensory experiences. They must then engage in deep reflection to distill those raw experiences into sharpened, rational knowledge. Finally, they must violently thrust that new rational knowledge back into the crucible of reality for further testing. Every single time you complete this exhausting cycle, both your comprehension and your execution ascend to a markedly superior level. This relentless mechanism is the unchanging hardware of human evolution. However, having the correct mechanism is utterly useless If you lack the psychological energy required to sustain the operation, we live within a culture plagued by a pathological need for instant gratification. People want to absorb a masterpiece book in 3 minutes, consume a cinematic journey in 4 minutes, and fast forward through complex narratives in 5 minutes. This toxic urgency fosters the delusion that we can somehow bypass the grueling process of becoming. We desperately wish to teleport from our current incompetence directly to the podium of ultimate mastery, completely erasing the vast territory of struggle that lies between. But reality is exceedingly cruel to those who harbor such naive illusions. When you approach the world with unrealistic impatience, what inevitably happens? You attempt a new discipline for 3 measly days, discover you are still thoroughly inept, and suffer a catastrophic collapse of willpower. Because you desire to become a master instantly, you guarantee that you will remain a beginner forever. Speed without substance is an illusion. Accumulation is the only verifiable truth. Therefore, the most foundational shift in your psyche must be the embracing of slowness. You must courageously acknowledge that genuine metamorphosis is a glacial process. Patience is not simply a secondary virtue, it is the absolute paramount capability that overrides all others. If you possess infinite patience but flawed methods, you will eventually stumble your way across the finish line. But if you possess brilliant methods without a shred of patience, your surrender is always a mathematical certainty. The paradox of progress states that deliberate slowness inevitably generates the highest velocity, while the hysterical pursuit of speed inevitably results in total nothingness. When the agony of anxiety grips your chest, you must stop asking how to achieve immediate victory. Instead, you must humbly ask yourself what microscopic contribution you can add to your accumulated foundation today. Writing 50 words, making a single phone call, or mastering one tiny concept is the undeniable bedrock of lasting greatness. Chapter 4. The 3 Keys of Mindset. The engine of the practice cycle cannot turn without the proper psychological lubrication. There are 3 non-negotiable mindsets required to sustain this upward spiral. The first crucial key is the absolute acceptance of the process itself. This is the weapon of patience, and it destroys the hurdle of hasty ambition. The second crucial key is the fearless acceptance of failure. This is the weapon of courage, and it annihilates the paralyzing disease of perfectionism. Human nature instinctively despises any form of defeat because it threatens the fragile ego. To defend themselves against this discomfort, people invent cowardly strategies like eternal preparation or pathological blame shifting. They refuse to begin because they dread a suboptimal result. But this rejection of practice guarantees a total absence of experience, which in turn guarantees eternal weakness. We must therefore completely erase the word failure from our internal vocabulary. Language possesses the terrifying power to shape our actual reality. The concept of failure carries a crushing, terminal weight that demands surrender. Instead, we must substitute it with the liberating concept of a missed attempt. A miss is dynamic, lightweight, and implicitly promises another immediate opportunity. You must view every encounter as a rigorous video game. To reach the final confrontation, you must traverse dozens of brutal levels, dying repeatedly along the way. Every virtual death provides crucial intelligence regarding hidden traps and enemy weaknesses. A true expert is never someone who has miraculously avoided all errors. Rather, they are the individual who has systematically walked into every conceivable trap within their chosen field, allowing every detonation to perfect their internal map. The third crucial key is the intentional acceptance of hardship. This is the weapon of continuous refinement, and it obliterates the seductive trap of the comfort zone. Once we acquire a basic proficiency in a skill, our brain cunningly drifts toward the path of least resistance. We begin to endlessly repeat the exact same actions, falsely believing that repetition equals growth. A professional might use the exact same template for 10 years, resulting in a decade of total stagnation despite ceaseless activity. If what you are doing feels wonderfully comfortable, you can be absolutely certain that your personal evolution has flatlined. To grow from a state of weakness into a state of unstoppable power, you must deliberately and painfully stretch yourself beyond your current capacity. True hardship is simply the necessary sensation of your intellectual muscles tearing and rebuilding themselves. Seeking discomfort is the ultimate evidence that you are rapidly ascending the mountain of mastery. Chapter 5. The Power of the Collective System. However, the individual will can easily become exhausted when facing a prolonged journey of hardship. To truly sustain action over a massive timescale, we must look at the grand philosophy of collective mobilization. In the context of epic historical struggles, victory was never achieved through short, violent bursts of individual heroism. True victory requires a protracted war sustained by the deepest possible well of energy. The greatest strategic minds understood that the ultimate source of indestructible power resides within the organized masses. When confronted by an enemy who possesses vastly superior immediate strength, economic advantages, and advanced resources, surrender seems logical. But the brilliant reversal is to recognize that true invincibility stems from mobilizing the seemingly invisible elements of the world. In historical terms, this meant awakening the entire population, turning every citizen into an active participant against the invader. It created an overwhelming ocean of resistance that swallowed the technologically superior foe whole. We can profoundly map this principle onto our own internal psychological battles. The formidable enemy we face is our own ingrained apathy, our deep-seated fears, and the comforting distractions of the modern world. To fight a successful protracted war against your own weakness, you cannot rely solely on isolated bursts of motivation. You must achieve a full-scale mobilization of your entire being. Every single thought, every tiny habit, and every fraction of your daily routine must be unified under a singular, relentless purpose. This represents the profound alignment of the internal system. You build a fortress of discipline so vast that no temporary setback can possibly penetrate its walls. Furthermore, true historical progress is always defined by moving from a state of reactionary stagnation into a state of unprecedented advancement. Your internal enemies, fear, procrastination, and self-doubt, are fundamentally obsolete forces that seek only to preserve the dying status quo. They represent the reactionary elements that will ultimately destroy themselves because they resist the inevitable laws of growth. Conversely, the part of you that demands change, that craves struggle, and that seeks the cold truth of objective reality represents the progressive vanguard of your future self. By organizing your internal resources and refusing to let any effort go to waste, you mimic the tactic of wearing down a massive adversary through countless small, precise strikes. Eventually, the balance of power within your own mind inevitably shifts from weakness to absolute sovereignty. Chapter 6. The Reconstruction of Action. Now that we have systematically deconstructed the illusions of fear and mapped the architecture of persistent action, how do we implement this in real time? The transformation occurs in the millisecond before you act. Whenever you encounter a challenge that makes your stomach churn with dread, you must actively reprogram your biological response. You must remind yourself, there is no such thing as permanent failure. There are only temporary misses. Every miss is an invaluable piece of objective guidance. Practicing the art of missing is entirely normal, and it is the only path to ultimate comprehension. When you fully absorb this conviction, you will discover something remarkable. The ancient fear will still reside in your chest, but it will completely lose its paralyzing grip. You will become fully capable of taking the shot while simultaneously experiencing the fear. And the very microsecond the ball leaves your fingertips, you have already won. Because the vast majority of humanity is content to spend their entire existence wrestling intractably with their emotions, refusing to ever enter the arena. Most people spin forever in a solitary circle of anxiety, while you choose to advance upward on the spiral staircase of genuine evolution. This chasm between you and the stagnant masses is never rooted in genetic talent. It is not defined by financial resources. It is strictly a consequence of operating with a radically superior belief system. When you adopt this posture, your recovery time from any reversal will shrink exponentially. A setback that once plunged you into a month of dark despair will suddenly only cost you 10 minutes of analytical recalibration. You cease wondering what others think of you, and you exclusively focus on adjusting the mechanics of your next attempt. Chapter 7. Philosophical Reflection. We ultimately return to our foundational inquiry. Why do people fail to act? They fail because they are captives of their own subjective hallucinations, refusing to enter the objective world of consequences. True action demands that we discard the childish fantasy of a painless journey. It requires us to recognize that hardship is the sacred hammer that forges the blade of competence. Are we always in total control of our sentiments? No. The emotional surges will eternally occur, but we retain absolute sovereignty over our attention and our subsequent physical actions. By embracing the endless cycle of practice, extracting rational truths from our clumsy mistakes, and diving back into the fracas with renewed vigor, we assert our fundamental autonomy over our own destiny. Choosing the arduous path makes existence significantly simpler in the long run. Conversely, choosing the comfortable path guarantees that your existence will eventuate in unbearable complexity and bitter regret. This is the inescapable dialectic of hardship and ease. Thank you for joining me in this deep exploration of the human condition. If this framework has altered your perspective, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. As we part ways today, I leave you with this essential philosophical inquiry to ponder. What is the single action you have been deferring due to fear? And how will you purposefully miss the shot tomorrow morning? Until next time.